Thank you for inviting me to this talk. It is an honor to be able to talk about this really important issue that we've been focusing on for a while at Genocide Watch in, well, I guess the last 2 years now. So it's very important to have the opportunity to share it with as many people as possible. And I'm going to try and explain the concept that this, or the perspective that this crisis, or this series of crises in Eastern Congo constitutes genocide, but also to explain the broader dynamics as well that inform this perspective, so that our audience can have as informed and as detailed an understanding of the experience of the Tutsi communities as possible. So to begin with, we need to have an understanding of who we mean when we use the word Tutsi. So it's a word that people are very familiar with in the context of the Rwandan genocide. And so in 1994, one of the most well-known and extreme cases of genocide took place in Rwanda, the extermination of the Tutsi community. The Tutsi community are in fact spread across different parts of Central Africa, particularly Rwanda, what's today known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then also Burundi. And there are a number of different groups that we can talk about, including the Banyamulenge in a province called South Kivu, and then also the Tutsi community in North Kivu. And the Tutsi are in North Kivu more broadly considered as being part of the Banya Rwanda community. That is a term that is used to refer to people considered to have originally come from Rwanda, but there are of course problematic associations with that term itself. But what we are emphasizing today is that the term itself is a social construct from, or as a legacy of, the colonial era, where Tutsi were constructed in the eyes of different societies, different perpetrators of violence, different repressors, as invaders and exploiters of other groups of people in the region. So with this very complex history that you can see on the screen, the key takeaway is that the legacy of colonial rule, and also the after effects of the post-colonial regime under the rule of dictator Joseph Mobutu, has been to construct and continue to construct Tutsi as outsiders and as repressors. And these different communities, known often as Rwandophones or Banya Rwanda, are often banded together and associated as being a collective that are a threat, or are seen as a threat, to other members of the Congolese population. And it was particularly in the 1980s and the 1990s when there was this intensification of nationality politics that really intensified the persecution of Tutsi and other Banya Rwanda groups. And that culminated in the Congo Wars. That was of course compounded by the after effects of the Rwandan genocide and the arrival of Hutu refugees, or other Rwandan refugees as well, in 1994. But it was also the result of processes that had been developing within Congo before 1994. And you've also got a community called the Hema, based in Ituri, who aren't always considered to be Tutsi, but the point again we're emphasizing today is that they share similar experiences with the Tutsi and other pastoralist groups, because Tutsi communities are traditionally pastoralists and also traditionally nomadic communities. So they share a similar history and have been subjected to similar degrees of dehumanization on the basis that they are pastoralists. And they also identified with the Tutsi community, particularly during the Congo Wars. So these are some key ideas to take away from the history, which is of course very complex, but it has had a disproportionately extreme impact on Tutsi communities. So I'm going to very quickly jump through some of these other slides about the context of the Democratic Republic of Congo today. Following independence, it was ruled by dictator Joseph Mobutu, who did use the typical tactic of divide and rule politics, and that did, while he did not lead that alone, it certainly did result in the persecution of Tutsi and other Banyarwanda communities in the 1990s in particular. And today, many people, many different communities, ethnic communities across Congo are still suffering from the legacy of both the colonial history and then also the post-colonial regime of Mobutu. And there are over 100 non-state armed groups active in Congo. This is due to a lack of effective government. There are, of course, a number of different crises, so much so that the violence and suffering that we often think of as continuing in Congo has become so normalized. So I would say that people were very, very familiar with these series of crises and challenges that Congo faces, and the way Congo as a country exists in the public mind of many people in the West and many consumers of media is that it is a problem. It's a country that faces a lot of problems, but those problems are so normalized that the specific experiences of certain communities, particularly minorities, does get overlooked. And also you have this very heightened focus on M23 at the moment, which is itself a reflection of the biases against certain minorities and an acceptance of all these other forms of suffering that different communities are facing, specifically minorities in Congo today. So also I'm going to very briefly conceptualize genocide without spending too much time on it. You have a number of different acts that are that meet the definition of genocide, but the key element is the point about intent. So intent to destroy in whole or in part. And while it's recognized that all these different acts, including killing members of a group and causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, does not always constitute genocide, it can constitute a number of other forms of violence or crimes against humanity, war crimes. There is a general consensus that intent to destroy is generally important, but there's also a lot of disagreement over what is intent to destroy and also what does in whole or in part even mean. And so with our 10 stages of genocide model that we use at Genocide Watch, you have these different processes which help us explain what it is about the experience of the Banyamulenge and Tutsi in Congo that helps us explain that their current experience is genocide. And this is a model which applies to many different contexts. So we use this model to both predict or recognize genocide, but also to recognize past genocide. And you can see these different processes, which very much happened in the cases of Rwanda, the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, particularly dehumanization and polarization, and the active preparation by organized groups to destroy a certain community or maybe certain communities. We know that in the case of the Holocaust, there were multiple groups targeted, even though Jewish people were the primary targets. In the case of the genocide of the Tutsi in Rwanda, they were targeted with all these different stages. The persecution of the group, but that was preceded by the dehumanization of the group, discrimination against Tutsi, attribution of symbols, including
Tom,
in the form of national IDs. So after what's often extermination, as what's considered the sort of final episode of processes of genocide, you have this stage of denial. But denial isn't just about denying whether a genocide even happens. So we do have a problem of Holocaust denial, or denial that the Rwandan genocide was a genocide, or that it even happened to the scale that that we know that it happened at. But people also deny whether violence, once it's acknowledged that the violence happened, whether it meets the definition of genocide. Or perhaps you can even deny that genocide targeted a particular community by reinforcing narratives of double genocide. For example, this debunked narrative that the Tutsi perpetrated genocide against the Hutu in reaction. So denial is itself a very broad category. And it's worth also noting that these stages are not always linear. And we could say even today in the context of European and American politics, there's a lot of dehumanization and polarization as well. But the context of DR Congo as a very insecure environment and a historically insecure environment means that dehumanization and the hate speech has a much more significant impact on targeted communities. Okay, so I'm going to skip over some of these slides as well, but it's just worth noting that there are different approaches to the concept of genocide, critical approaches which try to broaden the meaning of intent, and the main idea being that in recognizing genocide, or in using the word genocide, or perhaps at a legal level wanting to use the word genocide, it's also about recognizing that a group of people risk facing or have faced destruction regardless of the intent. However, what we want to emphasize in this presentation, and the other presentations will reinforce this, is that there is growing evidence that the genocidal hate speech that we've been seeing in Congo has had a direct impact on a lot of the violence against Tutsi and Banyamulenge communities. And so the Tutsi communities, particularly Tutsi in North Kivu and the Banyamulenge, have faced historical experiences of persecution and discrimination. So the Banyamulenge were deprived of their chiefdoms. So that is basically, in the context of Congo, their local political authority under the colonial regime. In the case of Rwanda, it was a different experience, but broadly speaking, they faced processes of discrimination that have now been seen to prove that they do not belong in Congo. So the fact that they did not have political authority under the colonial regime has been seen today as evidence that they have never belonged in the region as well. But they also had their citizenship revoked, along with other Tutsi Rwandophones in general, in 1981. And so that was an example of when all different Banyarwanda and Rwandophone Tutsi Hutu communities were seen as one collective, despite the very specific and varied histories in the region. And they were all seen as Rwandan immigrants. And by the 1990s, Banyamulenge were being ordered to leave by parliament. They were all being ordered to leave by the Congolese parliament, and they faced massacres and expulsions, and this culminated in the Congo Wars. Although the 2004 citizenship law after the wars ended in 2003, they did on paper grant Banyamulenge and Tutsi with citizenship. Their citizenship is still widely rejected in practice. People still cite false references to history to argue that they do not belong in the Democratic Republic of Congo today. But another key idea, which I'll also be very brief covering, is this theory called the Hamitic hypothesis, which claimed, if I go back a slide, which claimed that the Tutsi and the Banyamulenge communities were in fact this Nilotic, racially superior, white or light-skinned people from outside Africa, from the Horn of Africa, or this lost white tribe of Ham. This was a theory of the colonial era, which, although it's been completely debunked, it still informs ideas about where the Tutsi and the Banyamulenge in Congo come from today. And it has informed this narrative that they are not indigenous, but they are in fact invaders. And while in the context of Rwanda, the Tutsi were given a higher social status, in the context of Congo, they were deprived of their chieftaincies, their chiefdoms, as we discussed. But this narrative that they were this narrative that they were invaders or exploiters still took effect despite the discrimination that they faced. So the experiences were very varied between the different parts of Central Africa, but the overall impact on portraying Tutsi and Banyamulenge as outsiders remained very significant. And then we briefly touched upon the different experiences of genocidal violence that took place in the past. It's worth noticing, or at least noting, while I don't have time to go into all these details, that they have faced violence which was accompanied by incitement to their extermination in the past, at the beginning of the Congo Wars, so the first Congo Wars and the second Congo Wars. And so the recent experience of genocidal violence is not a new one, but it's a continuous process where, as communities, they have never really lived in complete security in Congo. And so the current situation of the Banyamulenge has been escalating since around 2016, 2017. And some of the groups that, the non-state armed groups that operate in Eastern Congo, they're called Mai militias. They're self-styled indigenous communities that see the Banyamulenge as outsiders, as invaders, and they have targeted Banyamulenge, removing them from their villages, destroying villages, killing people, looting their cattle as pastoralists. So a community is reliant on cows and cattle. That is itself a very destructive act of violence. And displaced Banyamulenge have been besieged in this area called Minembwe, and even there, under the protection of MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping force, have continued to be attacked from multiple directions and have not really been able to find security under MONUSCO's protection. And this crisis is framed as intercommunal conflict, mainly because of the responses of two notable Banyamulenge armed groups. But this is a very problematic narrative because it completely overlooks all the different historical processes and the disproportionate, asymmetric and targeted violence that we are focusing on in this presentation, that is informing this conclusion that the Banyamulenge face genocide. And of course, that is a problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Did someone? Oh, okay, yeah. So that is of course a problem in a lot of cases of genocide. You often get arguments which cite violence from members representing the targeted group as a way of downplaying the specific victimhood of the target group, and that is definitely the case in the case of the Banyamulenge today. The case of the Hema in Ituri has been very similar. It's been a case of systematic targeted violence. The UN.
Please mute your screen, Tom.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
Are you able to hear me? Okay.
Yes, please. Yes, Tom, continue.
Oh, yes, sorry. Okay. Yes. So the case of in Ituri province, the Hema have been targeted. What the UN has even said may constitute genocide. They've been very reluctant to draw that conclusion, but it's been very clear that it's been driven by hate speech and this perception that the Hema are a threat to particularly a community called the Lendu as well, and militias under the name of Codeco have been targeting them systematically as well. And then the situation of Tutsi and Banyarwanda or other Rwandophones more broadly in North Kivu has been one of just continued insecurity and victimization over the years. Tutsi have participated in rebellions such as CNDP in the 2000s, M23 in the early 2010s, and again the resurgence of M23 has involved a lot of anti-Tutsi hate speech as well. Tutsi have joined insurgencies because of their insecurity, because of their marginalization and persecution. However, as I emphasized at the beginning of the presentation, the focus has always been on the disruption that M23 has posed to the state of Congo, with little recognition of the experience of Tutsi themselves. It's sometimes in commentaries recognized as a reason why Tutsi have joined M23, but only from a perspective of wanting to understand why M23 is even happening, as opposed to a genuine demonstration of sympathy with the Tutsi as a persecuted community. And the hate speech, which will be touched upon a bit later in this conference, has been a major problem and has caused violence. We've seen Tutsi hunts, we've seen different forms of persecution within the last year, really, since the resurgence of M23.